Hello everyone, welcome to IAS Fully Explained. This will be the first channel on YouTube which will give you the entire syllabus of IAS in upcoming month, fully explained, so you don't have to go anywhere else. So first thing first, make sure to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so you get the notification whenever I upload the next video. So today we'll discuss about ancient history and let's get to into it. So we will talk about the sources of ancient history, that how we were able to know that what happened in the past. It was because of these sources that we have found. So sources are of different types. So first type of sources are like literary sources, which means like likes of Rig Veda. We know from Rig Veda we got to know about the early Vedic period, which was from 1500 BC to almost 1000 BC. Then there was Arthashastra of Kautilya, written by Kautilya, which tells us about the Mauryan dynasty. So we can get a generalized idea that what were the literary sources. So after literary sources, we get the information from the religious literature. Religious literature was like Vedas, Puran, Sutra literature, Upanishads, epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. So there is one thing that I really wanted to tell you that here is that Veda come under the category of Shruti. Shruti is something which can be heard, and where Purana, Sutra, and epics, they comes under the Smriti literature. So these you have to understand that what are the differences between Shruti and Smriti, and you have to understand that Vedas come under Shruti and Puranas comes under Smriti. So Smriti is means, as you can interpret if you are good in Hindi, so you can understand the word of understand the meaning of Smriti, which means literally remembered. So next thing is that Vedas. So Vedas, assigned to 1500 BC to 500 BC, is that we all know that there are four kind of Vedas, Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda. So each that the thing that we don't know, that each Veda has its own four parts, like Samhita, Brahmanas, Aryankas, and Upanishads. So we have four Vedas, and each of the four Vedas have their own subtypes. For example, Samhita is the main text of Veda, and the Brahmanas are the commentaries on Samhita. So they are the commentaries on the Samhitas. Then the Aryankas, they were called as the forest books. Deals with the sacrifice, ritual, magics, and all. Then comes the Upanishads. So Upanishad contain the philosophical discussion on Atma, Paramatma, and they are also referred as Vedanta. So you should understand this thing. Then comes the next is, then we just dive into Rig Veda. What does Rig Veda contain? So Rig Veda is one of the most ancient and valuable source to know the geographical extent of early Aryans, what they were like, how they lived. From Rig Veda we can understand that. So their occupation we can understand from their formation of society, their political situations, and everything that we can understand from Rig Veda. So Rig Veda Samhita, as I earlier told you that Rig Veda has four types, so is arranged into 10 books, which is called as mandalas. So there is also a point to be noted here, that the Rig Veda Samhita is also arranged in 10 books, which is called as mandalas. So you should be able to know this. Then comes the next is Samved. Samved, saw and saw. You can say that Samved is with Sangeet. Sam and Sangeet is similar kind of. Both started with the sound of saw, so which is very easy to remember. Samved, which deals with Sangeet, and deals with the musical hymns. And most of its verses are derived from Rig Veda, you know, and Gandharva Ved. Gandharva Ved, you have to remember this, that Gandharva Ved is Upveda of Samved. And also Bharat Muni, Bharat Muni wrote a book called Natya Shastra, which is based on Gandharva Veda. So this is a important question for prelims also. That the question might be very simple. Is that who wrote Natya Shastra? These are kind of straightforward questions that were asked in UPSC prelims. So you have to remember this, that Muni wrote Natya Shastra, and it is based on Gandharva Ved. So, and Gandharva Ved is Ved of Samved. So these are the things that you have to remember. Then comes the Yajurved. Yajurved is a third type of Ved, and Yajurved, it informs us about the ritual of sacrifice. And Yajurved exists in two types, Shwet Yajurved and Shyam Yajurved. As if you know Hindi very well, so you can literally tell the meaning of Shyam and Shwet. Shyam means dark, and Shwet means white. So one is white Yajurved, other one is black Yajurved. So the black Yajurved is in prose, and in the white Yajurved is in poetry. So this is how you can understand that Yajurveda consists of two, black and white, Shyam and Shwet. Then comes the fourth Veda, which is Atharva Veda. Atharva Ved is book of non-Aryan, so all the other three Vedas are book of Aryans, but Atharva Ved, you have to remember this. So Atharva Ved is book of non-Aryan. The thing is that Atharva Ved is composed in East, whereas the other three are composed in the land of Punjab. Around the banks of Sindhu and all those rivers. The earlier Vedas that we discussed, they were written in the land of Punjab, but the Atharva Ved, the book of non-Aryans, were composed in East. That is one important thing. And the second thing is, what does it contain? It deals with the charms and the spell, and it informs us about the changing belief of the non-Aryans, like how the time is progressing and time is changing, so their beliefs are also shifting towards something. So that you have to understand that Rigved, Samved and Yajurved are written by Aryans, and Atharva Ved is a book of non-Aryan. So this might be also a probable question in UPSC. So moving towards the next thing is that now as I told you earlier, the Vedas are known as Shruti. Shruti, because at the early Aryans did not know how to write. They did not know the art of writing. So what they used to do is that they used to memorize stuff. So how will you memorize stuff? When you heard something from someone. So when you heard something like the hymns of Vedas and everything, when you heard from something and you kind of memorize it, so that was called as Shruti. You literally heard from someone, and then it was passed on by generation on generation till the writing was invented. So this is the meaning of Shruti, and this is the meaning of Veda. So I hope that you don't have any doubt here that why Vedas are known as Shruti. So then there is Ramayana and Mahabharata, two great epics of Sanatana Dharma. Ramayana, as we all know, is written by sage Valmiki, and Mahabharata, we all know, is written by sage Vyas, which is very simple, and they are compiled around 400 CE. So moving to the next question is that the post-Vedic period. Now we have moved from the Vedic period to the post-Vedic period. So post-Vedic period consists mainly of ritual literature. Ritual literature in the sense, as I told you, and they were called as sutras. So the post-Vedic, they are called as sutras. So so these sutras were divided into different types. For example, Griha Sutra, Dharma Sutra, Shruta Sutra, and Sulva Sutra. So Griha Sutra is very simple because you can understand its name is suggesting Griha means ghar. So it's very simple. Rules regarding domestic rights of rituals, like naming birth and birth, naming, connected to birth and everything. Then comes the Dharma Sutra. Dharma Sutra, as its name suggests, it deals with the dharma or the law. Then comes the Shruta Sutra. It deals with the sacrifice. you know if you can't remember it, so you can literally make a connection there. The Shruta Sutra start with S, and sacrifice also start with S, so you can form a link there. The Shruta Sutra, that you have something to do with sacrifice. And then come the Sulva Sutra. So Sulva Sutra is something which deals with, for example, take as a modern civil engineering. So that was in the ancient times. Sulva Sutra deals with that kind of stuff, like that. For example, building the places of sacrifice, building the fire altars. Deals with the measurement and stuff. So this was the Sulva Sutra. So you have to understand these four. Now moving on to the next. Now comes to the Purana. We heard about the Vishnu Puran and all. So now we come about the Purana literature. So it's a valuable source for the political history. If we want to know about the political history of our ancient past, that how does that political situation was there. So we can understand it from Purans. So there are 18 Mahapurans, or you can say Great Purans, and many Upapurans. Upapurans means sub-Purans and everything. So Puran discuss mainly 5 topics. What are the topics? As I earlier told you, there are 18 Mahapurans, and each Puran, they generally discuss 5 topics. First thing they discuss is the creation of world, which is also called Sarga. Creation of world, that how this world was created. Then there is recreation, which is called as Prati Sarga. So creation of the world is called as Sarga, recreation is called as Prati Sarga. Then third is that period of various manus. As we have heard that if you follow Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism, then you must have heard about Manu, and then it told us about what was the first Manu, then second and third. It tells us about the period of various Manus. Then genealogies of gods and rishis. Genealogies mean like study of their family history. Like who were their grandparents and grand to parents, their parents. So genealogy of the gods and rishi, so which is called Vamsha, Vamsha, Vamsha. So then in the last they talk about the account of various dynasties, which is called as Vamsha Charitra. So now we have to just summarize it all, that Puranas, there are 18 Mahapuran, which tells us about the political history, and Purana discuss mainly 5 topics, which is creation of world, which is known as Sarga, recreation, Pratisarga, period of various Manus, Manu Avtaras, then genealogies of gods and rishis called Vamsha, and then the account of various dynasties called Vamsha Charitra. For instance, like if you have heard about Vishnu Puran, Matsya Puran or Vayu Puran. For instance, Vishnu Puran tells us, tells us about the Mauryan history. Matsya Puran tells us about Satavahanas, and the Vayu Puran, tells us about the Imperial Guptas. So these are the things that you can understand. We are not literally getting into history right now. We are looking for the sources of the history, that how we were able to know each and everything, and then comes to move to the next thing is Buddhist literature. Now move to the Buddhist literature. So you have to understand this, that Buddhist literature is mainly found in 2 languages, Pali and Sanskrit. And yes, there might be a question that Buddhist literature was based on, they might confuse you with Prakrit. Prakrit was not Buddhist literature. Buddhist literature was written in Pali and Sanskrit, so you have to understand that. So Pali canons is divided into three pitakas, and these are very famous pitakas of Buddhism that you have to read them. You have to know them. Very simple: Sutta Pitaka, Vinay, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. So let's talk about the first thing, Sutta Pitaka. Sutta Pitaka is something which is some summary of teaching of Buddha. You know, it described the first Buddhist council which held around 400 BC under the patronage of Haryanka king Ajatashatru. So this is also important. You have to understand that Ajatashatru, was the ruler at that time when the first Buddhist council was held. So you have to know this. And also, this is very important. The famous Jataka tales, which tells us about the previous birth of Gautam Buddha, are the part of Sutta Pitaka. This might be a probable question in UPSC. There is always a one or two question from UPSC every year from Buddhism. Then, then after that, there are reliefs of Jataka tales on the stones wall around the stupa of Sanchi and Bharu, which were built around the same time of the. So then comes the Vinay Pitaka. Just understand that. Understand the one thing is that the Jataka tales are the part of Sutta Pitaka. This is an important question. Then comes the Vinay Pitaka. Vinay Pitaka is contained the disciplinary rule and regulation for leading a monastic life for the monks. For the monks, how they will live, what would be their rules and everything. So this is discussed in the Vinay Pitaka. Then moving to the next thing is Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is the third type of Pitaka. Abhidhamma is the doctrine. It consists of seven texts, and it deals with the doctrine of the Buddha. Doctrine means in the sense the way you think. What is your thinking process, or what is your thought process, which is what was the thought process of Dr. Gautam Buddha, which is literally mentioned in Abhidhamma Pitaka, the doctrine of Buddha. So then comes there is another literary source that we can understand about Buddhism and past, which is Therigatha. Therigatha is the collection of poems composed by monks. Therigatha. Then comes the Milind Panho. It's a very important question also. Who wrote Milind Panho and what was Milind Panho all about? Milind Panho was all about a Greek king called Milinda and a Buddhist monk called Nagasena, and it's their conversation. Basically consist of their conversation. Nagasena tells Milind about the Buddhism, and Milind asks the question about his doubt and everything. So this is written in Milind Panho, which is a very important thing. You have also you need to remember that Therigatha also. Then moving to the next part is that it discusses a number of problems and disputed point of Buddhism, as they were talking, and it is a masterpiece of Pali literature. As I earlier told you, that the Buddhist language, you have to understand this. You have to formulate a web in your mind that Buddhism literature was written in Sanskrit and in Pali. So when you understand that, it makes much more sense then. And then comes the Buddha Ghosha. Buddha Ghosha was a great commentator of Pali of Buddhism, and then there are the Sanskrit literature, which is like Lalit Vistara and Vaipulya. So there are two Sanskrit literature of Buddhism, mainly Vaipulya and Lalit Vistara. Lalit Vistara is something which tells us about the story of Buddha's life, but in a kind of a they add something like some texture to it, just to make it more interesting. That is Lalit Vistara. Then comes the Buddha Ghosha, which was a great commentator. He was a great commentator in Pali of Buddhism. He lived in Ceylon. So Ceylon is the ancient name of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka changed its name to Sri Lanka in 1973. So he wrote commentaries on all the Pali text, like three Pitakas. He wrote Vishuddhi Magga and these kind of books that he wrote, and he was a great commentator in Pali. So you have to understand that what he has written. This might be a direct question, that who wrote Vishuddhi Magga and stuff like that. Moving towards the next thing is that Nagarjuna is also another Buddhist scholar. He wrote different kind of books, like he wrote Sata Saharika, he wrote Prajna Paramita, he wrote Madhyamik Sutra. So you have to understand that who wrote Sata Saharika, Prajna and Madhyamiki. It was Nagarjuna. Then there were also the Pali Chronicles of Ceylon, something like Divya Vadna, which tells us about the Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Mahavastu, at the time, it tells us about the Buddhism, then Mahaparinirvana, and these kind of things tells us about the Buddhism in detail, and also about the Indian history. Then comes the Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa. So these are the most authentic Buddhist work, in determining the early career and succession of Chandragupta Maurya. Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa on the first Mauryan Empire. So you also have to remember this. Then you will be able to understand history much more efficiently. It will go like a story. Everything that happened in history was like a story. So let's just close your eyes and assume that you are listening to a wonderful story of wonderful past of Indian history, Indian ancient history, and just remember what was important. How we get to know was because of the Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa. Then moving to the next thing, Mahayana works of Ashwagosha. Ashwagosha was also, such as Buddha Charitra was also, tells us about the at the time. Uh, then the Sundarnanda Kavya tells us about, it was a partly religious, partly secular. It also tells us about. Just remember that we are not into history right now. We are understanding the sources of our history, that how we get to know about history. So these are the books, and these are the literature, these are the ancient literature of Buddhism, the Brahminical and everything, which tells us about that this is the only reason that we were able to have a greater understanding of our past, because of these literature. So that is why it is important. So we were talking about Ashwagosha. So now he has work on Mahayana. I'll tell you what is the difference between Mahayana and Hinayana in the next videos. So these are the very kind of important thing that you have to understand. And then moving to the next thing is that Jainism. So Jainism also tells us about the ancient, in ancient Indian history. The texts were written in Prakrit. So this is the important thing that you have to understand here. Jainism texts were written in Prakrit, and Buddhism texts were written in Pali and Sanskrit. So don't confuse these things. These might be the very simple question in UPSC. You can easily score marks here. So eventually compiled in 6th century AD at Vallabhi, Gujarat. Jain texts are called as Anga, as we all know, and contain philosophical concept of Jainism. Some work of Jainism are like 12 Angas, which tells us about the philosophical concept there, and the Kalpa Sutra, the Bhagavati Sutra, something and stuff like that. And moving to that, there is also some like Paristhiti Parvan, Uttara Adhyana. Then there is Andhra Magdhi, and these are the kind of literature which tells us about Jainism and also about the Indian history. Then come about the another source, which is a secular literature. Secular literature in the sense which does not include religion in it, but which include something like for example Dharma Shastra or law book. Dharma Shastra like the Samritis of Manu, and they tells us about tons of information about Hindu society, Dharma Shastra. And then there is Manusmriti, which is also tells us about how to live, how society should behave, and everything, which was most likely to be compiled around 200 BC to 200 AD. Then moving towards the next is that Arthashastra of Kautilya, provide rich material for study of Indian economy, the polity of at that time of the Mauryan period. Arthashastra, it's a very popular book. uh, you know then earliest and most important work on grammar is Ashtadhyayi. Ashtadhyayi is something which was written by Panini, and it was, you know, scholar which dated by scholars around 700 BC. And it's based on grammar. So this is also a very important question asked in UPSC, that who wrote Ashtadhyayi and what was the basis of Ashtadhyayi, and this is also that Patanjali wrote Mahabhashya. It's also an important source of grammar. Then moving toward the next is that books based on astronomy. So the Bhatia, Bara Mihiraj Brihat Samhita. This is also very important. You have to understand that. Then there is drama books, Vishakha Datta's Mudra Rakshasa, which were based on dramas. Vishakha Datta's again Devi Chandraguptam, which tells us about the genealogy of Guptas, which tells us about the families of the Guptas. And Mudra Rakshasa tells us about, contain the information about Nandas and Mauryas and all. Then moving to the Kalidasa, which were he was a very very famous person. Everyone in India know who was Kalidasa, but his work is something which was something very very impressive. Something he wrote like famous work like Malvika Agnimitra, which tells us about the valuable information about Sangha dynasty. So this might also be a very important question there, that Malvika Agnimitra tells us about which dynasty, which is a Sangha dynasty, and this is also that. So work of Kalidasa, who lived during the Gupta period, comprised something like Avijana Shakuntalam, Ritu Samhara, Meghadutam. So these are the direct questions which are asked in UPSC, so you should know this. Then moving to the next thing is that for the history of Kashmir, we have the important book called Rajatarangini. Rajatarangini is written by Kalhana, which tells us about the history of Kashmir. This is also a very important. Then Harsh Charitra, written by Bana Bhatta, who was his biographer and all, so which also tells us about the ancient history. And then moving toward the Sangam literature. Now we come over. Now we were right now. Up until now we were talking about the North India and the Central India. Now we are talking about the Sangam literature, which is part of you can say the South India. Composed between 3rd century BC and 3rd century AD. It include many texts like Tolkappiyam, Ettugoi, and other many like two epics like Mani Mekalai and other thing like that. So Tolkappiyam, authored by Tolkappiyar, is the earliest Tamil literature work on the Tamil grammar. So we also understand that that Panini also wrote about grammar. So we have to understand here that the Tolkappiyar written by he also wrote about Tamil grammar. So these are the kind of questions which are asked. So then move on to the next thing is that Attu Gogai, Attu Togai, and Pattu P Pattu work divided into two main groups, Aham and Puram. So these works were divided into two parts, Attu Togai and Pattu P Pattu. So these were divided into two groups like Aham and Puram. So Aham means love, Puram means valor. So so we have to understand that these were the Sangam literature, from where we can understand the society of South Indian culture and everything. Then also Then now we just kind of finish that. Now we will come to the literature. Now we will be much more precise in the sense that the person which the books, what kind of books were written by by whom. So first is the first person that we were discuss here is Bhasha. He wrote 14 plays. Some of his famous plays are like Panchtantra. We everybody had everybody have heard about this Panchtantras, the tales of Panchtantra. Then something he wrote like Pratima, Yagna Dhanyan. And then he also wrote like something like Swapna Vashadutam. So these are the some masterpieces by Bhasha. Like Swapna Vashadutam, which is quite literal. If you know Hindi, that quite literal in its meaning. Panchtantras, stories, epics of Panchtantra. Then there was the second Ashwagosha. He was the Pali commentator of Buddhism. He wrote Buddha Charitram, the biography of Buddha. Then he wrote Sutra Lankar, and the philosophical text he wrote. Then he wrote Sundrananda, the story of Sundra and Anand. And these are the kind of things. These are the things that you should remember. These are very important to remember, and you should, because these are the direct question asked. Like who wrote Panchtantra, who wrote Swapna Vashadutam, who wrote Buddha Charitram, who wrote Sutra Lankar. So these are the very straightforward questions and very easy marks, to be very honest. Then comes the Siddhartha. He was the third one. The famous at that time. So he wrote Mirchya Katikam, and it is the first realistic play in Sanskrit. As you can see, Sanskrit was very popular at that time. So this might be also be a question, that who wrote the first realistic play in Sanskrit and what was its name. Its name was Mirchya Katikam, and it was written by Shudraka. Then comes the Vishakha Datta. His epic dramas, like as we have discussed earlier, like Mudra Rakshasa, Devi Chandraguptam. For example, Mudra Rakshasa tells us about the Kautilya's diplomatic style with the Mahamatyas of Dhananandas. Nandas were ruling at that time. And Devi Chandraguptam tells us about the related with the Chandragupta Vikramaditya. So these are the kind of things which tells us about the ancient history. Then comes the Kalidas. As I earlier told you, he is very popular. There might be the easiest question. You have to know that what is written by Kalidas and what is not written by Kalidas. He write Raghuvansham, Meghadutam, Kumara Sambhavam, Malvika Agnimitram, which tells us about the Sangha dynasty, Avijanya Shakuntalam. So we have to understand, Raghuvansham was written by him, Meghadutam, Kumara Sambhavam. You should remember these things. And there were another authors like Vairavi, who wrote Kirata Arjunayam, and there were another authors who wrote different kind of books. For example, Bilhan wrote Vikram Manak Devi Charitram. It was on Chalukyan ruler of Kalyani. You have to also understand this. And these are the kind of things which are literally you don't have any option, you have to mug it up. So then there is Ananda Bhatta, who wrote Balal Charitra. Then there is Hemachandra, who wrote Kumar Pal Charitra. Then comes Kalhana's Raj Tarangini, which tells us about Kashmir. Then Raj Tarangini 2 of Jona Raj, and Raj Tarangini 3 of Shivar and Sukha, and Prithvi Raj Raso written by Chand Bardai. Then if we move towards the next thing is that then Megasthenes was he wrote Indica. which he was, Greek ambassador in Chandragupta Maurya's court, that we everybody know. Then the Herodotus in his histories gave the information about Indo-Persian relations, political condition at that time. There were also some books, for example, the Count of Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which also tells us about the seas activity, the port activities of at that time. Then there was, Ptolemy, who tells us about the geography of that, talked about geography at second century AD. Then there was Pliny, who gives us account about animal, plant, minerals. You should do not confuse these two. you know the first deals with the geography and the later deals with the plants and animals. So you should not, just kind of make a bit of, you know uh, make sure that you do not confuse something like this. Then there were also, Chinese account of Yuan Sang, then Fa Hian's account. So this tells us about, for example, Yuan Sang tells us about the reign of Harsha, Fa Hian tells us about the reign of Chandragupta Maurya. There are Tibetan historians who tell us about, about Buddhism, like Taranath. He tells us about Buddhism. Then there are, Arabs accounts and travels, which tells us about the ancient history. Then there is Al-Baruni's, Tariq Hind, which is also a very important source of, you can say, the medieval history. He at the time of Mahmud of Ghazni, and then after that there are non-literary. Now the literary part is finished. The kind of books and everything now becomes out the non-literary source. Non-literary source means like inscriptions. The study of inscription. First of all, we should know that what is epigraphy. Epigraphy is known as the study of inscription, the person who study inscriptions. So earlier inscriptions were written in Prakrit. Later they were time in they were written in Tamil and Sanskrit also. For example, Mauryan king Ashoka, the great Ashoka, was the first person to issue such inscriptions. Most of his inscriptions are, this is also very important, most of his inscriptions are in Prakrit language, written in, Brahmi script. But some of his northwest, some of up in the northwest region were written in Kharoshthi script.